The exposure triangle, or in this case pizza, has 3 sides, each representing one of your manual camera settings: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Each side varies from light to dark depending on the settings you use. For example, a long shutter speed lets in more light, whilst a fast one does not. Each side goes from brightest on the left to darkest on the right. Now the idea is that if you make one element brighter, then you have to compensate by making the other 2 elements darker. It's the idea that you're constantly juggling these 3 factors to get correct exposure for whichever situation you may be in. Now this is all well and good in a theoretical sense, but when it comes to the real world, things can get a bit tricky. Now remember from the last video, we have to consider the other implications of altering our manual settings too, like noise, motion blur, and depth of field. So for example, I took this shot around 10 PM, so it's pretty much pitch black, with the only light coming from weak street lights. My settings were as follows. My aperture was f1.8 because I wanted that shallow depth of field. My ISO was 3200 because it was dark, and my shutter speed was 1/50. So this is where the issues began. Anything faster in regards to shutter speed and the shot was going to be too dark, and anything slower, the motion blur would look too messy. So whilst the exposure triangle is all well and good in theory, it doesn't take into account that trial and error thing you have to go through every time you want to take a good photo. So another thing the exposure triangle is good for showing is aperture priority and shutter priority modes. Aperture priority mode is when you pick your aperture and ISO and the camera sorts out your shutter speed. This is good if you know you want a shallow depth of field and you can just let the camera sort out the shutter speed. And shutter priority mode is when you pick your shutter speeds and your ISO and the camera sorts out your aperture. This might be good if you're doing sports photography where you know you need a fast shutter speed and you don't really care as much about your aperture and your depth of field. Okay guys, so that's it for this week. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. And if you want to see more tutorials and films and stuff, please subscribe to my channel. But yeah, other than that, I'll see you next week. Cheers!